All the roads are windy.
I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you for having us here to interview you, Joe. And I would love to hear, what is your ancestral lineage that you know?
Well, let's see. I have a grandmother who was born in France and came over to America as a child. On my father's side, they've been up in New England for quite a few generations. It's British, English, I think, but I don't know a whole lot about it.
Have you ever thought about doing one of the DNA tests?
I've thought about it. I'm a little bit dubious. I mean, you're giving away your DNA, and who knows what they might want to do with it at some point in time. So, if it wasn't for that issue, mild degree of paranoia and not really huge motivation to do it. So,
Yeah.
have you?
I did do it. I just decided, I have a cell phone on me all the time. I've got, whatever they're doing, they're already like so entrenched. I feel like this generation,
Yeah,
I'm
well,
like,
that's a way to look at it too.
yeah,
There's no privacy anymore.
I don't think there is. And I think people think there is, but unless you're out here in the woods where there's literally no devices listening, there's no privacy.
I am out here in the woods, and
Yeah,
I don't even
you've got it.
I don't own a cell phone,
Mhm.
and so I am pretty withdrawn.
You're about as private as it can get this day and age. Yeah. Great. Well, a couple things. Let's start. What year did you find this land, or did this land find you? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
I'd say it's more like the land found me. It's all, I more and more believe that nothing happens really by accident in this planet. At least doesn't seem to happen to me. So I found this land in 1972. So a little bit of recap. After I graduated from college, the Vietnam War was on. I joined the Peace Corps. They sent me over to Malaysia, and then actually to the part of Malaysia that's on the island of Borneo. And then they asked for volunteers for a kind of more, I don't know, wilderness wouldn't be the right word, but a more primitive area. Like a lot of people just went and taught at the local high school. But I got this job traveling up and down the river, supervising little primary schools in the villages. The super picturesque. The villages are all longhouses, like 50 families in one building on the side of the river. And anyway, I fell in love with it. And changed my life largely, and then coming back to America and walking into a mall, I'm like, oh my God. I got culture shock not coming home. I got culture shock. And the realization that those people were probably happier and healthier than Americans, certainly not less so. And so I was raised as my dad was a college professor, my mom's a librarian. So the natural thing would be, let's go back to grad school, get a degree in anthropology, and then I can come back over here and study these people. And then kept stalling on the application to grad school, and finally realized that I actually just wanted to live like that. I didn't really want to study it. I just wanted to do it. So then some neighbors of mine in Detroit were coming down here because of Penland School of Crafts. They were all little craft communes, 60s kind of thing. They said I'd tag along, and it lasted a couple of years, like most of those experimental communes. And by then, I really liked it here, and so I was just asking around for land. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a car. I didn't even have a driver's license. And this just fell in my lap. I was selling some vegetables to this woman, and she said, oh, my dad's got a piece of land that he wants to sell. So it turned out to be just up the end of the road. I was living just 3 miles away, and he said, well, it's up at the end of the road. Here's the deed. And the deed had like 3 corners with the national forest. So I kind of wandered around and found these corners and got an idea of the scope of the place. Is 2.8 acres, not very big. And then I walked kind of down towards what I thought was the middle. And I looked down and I saw the first ginseng plant I had ever seen in real life, just like a picture out of a book with the red berries on it and everything. Like, bing! I would have bought it anyway, but that was a really nice affirmation, you know. I would have bought anything. I asked the Lord, the great spirits, to give me just a little piece of strip mine. At that age, I was looking for a challenge. This was pretty challenging. The ground is about 80% rocks, but it wasn't quite a strip mine, actually. Never been farmed because it was so rocky. So just logged every 30 years or so. So it was all grown up in little 6 to 8 inch poplars. I cut them down, built this log cabin. I had a foxfire book. I'd never built anything before. So I got started, and then after I built the cabin, finally I was ready to start gardening. That's when I found out it was about 80% rocks. But they're nice rocks. They're flat on both sides. They stack really nicely. So I made all these little rock walls everywhere to use them up.
I love that the ginseng spoke to you, even though you said you would take it. You're like, I'm looking for anything, but that ginseng, what was it about the ginseng? Why ginseng? And what did it really speak to you when you saw it?
Ginseng
What
is
was
so
going on?
special. I mean, it's, you know, it's the most precious. I mean, just even in terms of economics nowadays, the guy who gets it out of the woods can get $1,000 a pound for it. But that's not why it's so special. It's so special because it's probably our best adaptogenic, that is to say, health-promoting herbs, and the American Indians respected it very highly. I mean, it's just the most special herb in the woods, really. It's the one everybody goes hunting for. I don't hunt, but you can get a little bit of the thrill of hunting by looking for ginseng, because that's pretty rare. You know, and you see the red berries. That's when people usually go look for it, is when it's got the red berries on it. You spot one, it's like, it's a thrill.
Beautiful too.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
hmm So when this land found you and you found this land, when you found each other, what was your depth of knowledge about plants at that time? Had you really studied plants intensively, or were you just kind of like a book, book taught? How deep had you really gone?
And not at all, really. When I was in college, probably after business administration, botany would have been the last thing I would have wanted to study.
Wait, like on your you had no interest.
No interest.
Wow.
I
Okay.
just thought botany was just having to memorize a whole lot of names. Like, who was that, you know? No, that connection all came along just from thinking about where the world was going and what's the problems, and it just seemed evident. And what I really wanted to do was try and develop, like, use my life to try and develop a better way to live on Earth. And it immediately became apparent that plants is what it's all about. It was all about, like, growing my own food, and I really at that point had no interest in medicinal herbs either. I got drawn into that, basically sucked into a vacuum, because nobody was doing it. You know, there's this kind of resurgence of everything that happened with the Whole Earth Catalog and the Mother Earth News and Back to the Land and all this. And so herbs starts making this comeback, because herbs was kind of a dead issue all through the 30s, 40s, 50s. We were cranking people out of medical school with the idea that herbs was just a myth. It was just folklore. And then it starts coming back. Rosemary Glad starting people, and there starts to be a lot of interest in the medicinal herbs, but nobody was growing them. There's one nursery in Canada selling medicinal herbs. There's 75 herb nurseries in America, and it's all 15 kinds of rosemary, 30 kinds of thyme, 28 mints, on and on and on. And maybe they would have ginseng and golden seal. So, and my idea was to have a botanical garden of useful plants. So I was just collecting all kinds of useful plants. I worked up at one time a list of the 1,000 most useful plants that would be able to grow here. So a lot of them from East Asia, because there's a similar bioclimate. So first I looked for the parts of the world that have the same bioclimate, and then I look all the native peoples there and what did they compose their lives from? Like what were the plants that they were using, and then I worked up this whole database, etc. So I was collecting medicinals, but I was never really using them very much because I wasn't getting sick very often. So it was all kind of academic until I found out about these adaptogenic herbs, which are health promoting. And so I have to have those in my, I was calling this, and I do call this a paradise garden. A paradise garden is a botanical garden of useful plants grown ecologically and arranged ornamentally. That's my long definition. My short definition is it's the garden where everything you need is there for the taking. So the idea is to kind of try and get back to being a hunter-gatherer, forager on my own land. And the whole problem with hunter-gatherer foragers, which is the niche that we lost, that's the last time we really fitted into Gaia. We were hunter-gatherer foragers, kind of a keystone species, and then we lost that with the origins of agriculture and then the development of civilization, the economy, whatever you want to call it. So now you ask somebody what they do for a living, they tell you how they make money. But there is another whole way to live on the planet, which is from a direct relationship with the Earth, right? So that's what I was trying to get back to. The whole problem with the hunter-gatherer-forager thing is it needed a lot of land. Like we couldn't do that with the population we've got now. So my response to that is to pack the environment, like up the carrying capacity by just cramming the environment with more and more useful plants. So that's what I do. And the way I do that is to create microhabitats. So I can get more diversity in my garden by having more microhabitats. Like there's no running water in my garden, but I can bring water down from the national forest. So I can create a pond and I can grow all these water plants. Or there's no lime here, so I can add lime to this area and then I can grow all the plants that like lime. So that's kind of my approach to what I'm doing here.
I love that. I love that you looked at similar ecoregions around the world too for guidance and what the indigenous peoples of those lands had done, how they were in relationship with the land, what they knew about the plants, and kind of brought that together. And it shows that, the earth, while it's so different across the world, there are similarities. And how can we actually protect the diversity of what's quickly being lost in this day and age by looking? I love that perspective of how you just looked at that and said, oh, well, that matches this where I am. I can tend to this. I can store this. I can cultivate this here and just see what happens.
Yeah. Actually, it gets even a little bit more interesting with East Asia because the plants are actually related, which is something botanists have been talking about for hundreds of years. They noticed quite early on, they call it the Great Disjunction. Disjunction is where you got two related plants, but they're populations of the same plant, but they're separated. So there obviously has to be a story, like how did this happen, In the case of East Asia, Eastern North America, the story is the glaciers kind of chopping everything up. What was a universal circumpolar flora, like in Europe, it all gets shoved into the Mediterranean and wiped out. But in Eastern Asia and Eastern North America, the plants retreat south along the mountains and then come back up. So you can go into forests in certain parts of China and every tree will be the same genus as a tree here. And you look down at the herbs and you'll see Solomon seal and black cohosh and ginseng and wild yam, but they'll be Chinese species. So that's a really fascinating thing. That's a lot of what I do. It also applies to wild foods. Like in Japan, they've got a word, which is my other specialty, is wild food perennial vegetables. In Japan, they've got a word, sansai, one word, and it means wild mountain vegetables. And people really like to eat this stuff in the spring. Like we eat asparagus, that's our, and we eat ramps around here. It's a big deal. But they've got a list of about 40 or 50 things that they like to eat in the spring. And almost every one of them has a closely related plant here, like right here. So interesting. And it's really interesting to see how the Chinese use, say, their Solomon seal. We use Solomon seal for joint problems and bone and so on, and they use it as a longevity tonic. So, lots to learn.
Definitely. So how has the vision for what you're doing here shifted over the years? I mean, you've been here almost 50 years now. When you started, it sounded like you have a very simple vision and motivation, and as you've been here, things have come into focus. What is the vision now and looking forward?
Well, I'm trying to get my land into some kind of a land trust. What I've always wanted is a small community of like 6 or 7 people, but I've never really managed to achieve that. There's been some great people who have come through here, and part of the problem was that I could never really offer them equity because I've made a commitment with my former spouse that rather than split up the land, we would both agree that it would go to my son. So I felt bound by that. Well, so recently my son has told me that he doesn't want it. So all of a sudden, everything opens up. So now I'm trying to get my land into some kind of land trust and trying to find those 5 or 6 people who kind of share my ideals to run the place. Just in the last few days, I've had a very interesting communication with some Cherokee Indian people, and I'm now thinking that rather than join something called agricultural trust, that's one option we've been looking at. Maybe I'll just turn it over to the Cherokee. So I'm waiting. This guy's going to come and visit, and we'll talk about possibilities. Because it's not just a piece of land. I mean, it's this whole project. It's the botanical garden, and it's the library, and it's the herb shop, and everything. And so, if he can find me some young, smart Cherokee Indian people that want to come and live here, that'll be terrific. Anyway, it's kind of in flux, but that's my sort of my final vision. Is what I want to do is get this community. I think it would be really quite an extraordinary demonstration if half a dozen people could support themselves on 3 acres of which this is not even agricultural land. This is beyond marginal land, what I have here, and if we could actually, but I think it's really possible with a combination of permaculture and French intensive vegetable production and so on, and all the perennial foods I've got going. So that would be the challenge, the kind of ultimate validation of my project is if it could really work out for that many people to successfully make a living here. And the whole project all along has been like minimum money, which is the reverse of having you either get your needs from Gaia or you get needs from money. So the whole idea is to try and get out of, we're all stuck in the money thing, try and get ourselves back to a more direct relationship with the planet. So that's a constraint that I've put on myself. The only 3 things I feel comfortable about spending money on is books, plants, and tools, all of which can be shared, plants can be multiplied, etc. Everything else, if the world was different, I would love to travel and see all the beautiful parts of the world and all the wonderful cultures and tribal people, but I just can't justify it.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing. That would be so amazing because the Cherokee are the original people of this land, right?
Right?
Right.
Oh, this is their sacred mountain. This is the Great Wall of Gadua that I live right at the foot of.
Yeah, that would be just amazing if and you've stewarded so many rare species of this land, but also, added to it, and just to be able to continue that stewardship with the people who've been here for thousands and thousands of years. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, there's openings, folks.
There's openings.
Get in touch.
Y'all, listen up. Yeah, I love that. How do you experience communication from the plants and the land? Like, do you believe in plant spirits or
Yes, I certainly believe in plant spirits. Unfortunately, I have never figured out how to actually communicate with them in a way that I was sure I was communicating with them, more than not just inventing something in my head. But my approach has always been I never plan anything out on paper because that's just too intellectual. I just go out there and work, and I feel like I'm absorbing knowledge through my hands from the dirt, and just ideas kind of come and happen. And the paths got laid out because the stump was here and that was there, and it's just all. I like it to be just kind of spontaneous. Uh, so, no.
I mean, it sounds to me like you are in constant dialogue in that way. It's not like, "Hi, I'm
Well, I like to
ginseng."
think so.
Yeah. Right? You're like, look, you're witnessing them and they're inspiring you and you're acting back. Like you are really connecting in
Yeah.
that way.
I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes people, and I love, can I ask, how old are you?
I will be 80 next year. It'll be the 50th anniversary of Mountain Gardens, and it'll be my 80th anniversary.
Wow. Party time.
Yep.
Cool. So at almost 80 years old, you're still like, I don't know if they're communications from plants. That is an outsider come in, I'm like, there's no way you're not in communication with the plants, So I love this example because I've come across people so often who just aren't sure if they're hearing their intuition or if they're hearing the plants. And I think sometimes there's expectations that it comes through as words as we talk to each other. But in your example here, I see it being the way that you are noticing them, how they grow, witnessing the stump, witnessing the fertile earth, and that is communication. That is, and like plant spirits don't talk to everyone with words. It's
Right.
such an energetic exchange.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You have anything more you want to say about that?
I don't know. Yeah, like, just ideas come into your head, and did they come from the plants? Where can't pin it down, but I'm thankful for them. Things come to you in dreams, right?
Totally.
So one of the things that I hope people take away who come and visit is that I started this project when I was 30 years old. So it's all been done. It was all woods when I bought it, rocky soil, totally marginal. So everything that's happened here is just working by hand. There's never been any bigger machine on here than a chainsaw. And with as little money as possible. This building is built out of either stuff that came off this land or recycled windows that were going in the garbage or some recycled tin roofing. So this is what you can accomplish in your life if this is what you like. We look at these landscapes in Europe and Asia and so on, and we think, oh, how many hundreds of years did it take for people to achieve that? Well, you can do a lot in your lifetime. Just, I could have gone and made a lot of money and come back here and tried to make this paradise garden with, lots of financial resources. So what I'm trying to show is, no, you're better off just doing it, because every time you change the state of something, you lose something, right? If you burn coal to put it into electricity and you lose some, and then you can make steam with that or whatever, you're constantly losing something. So you take your time and you turn it into money, and then you come back with the money to try and achieve something. Better to just do what you want to do without the money is what I'm trying to demonstrate.
Just go straight to it. It's like take out this middleman,
right,
and do the thing you want to do. And over time, so I feel like, especially this day and age, so many people, we're in our late 30s now, almost 40s, and we have friends across the whole spectrum of, early 20s to up to 60s and so on. And I feel like so many people are so stuck in a mentality of I need to make money for retirement. I need to make money to pay for the land. And like, I don't know how much this land cost when you got it, um, but land costs a lot of money sometimes, depending where you are. But have you found that, like, since you've chosen this route that wasn't using money as the currency, what other ways have resources showed up for you? What other types of currency flow through your life?
Well, what's on the land? Basically, I've got, I can say it's so marginal land that nobody would have looked twice at, except that it happens to be adjoining the national forest, which gives it some value. But it was actually 4 different plant communities just on this little 2.8 acres, all with different trees, different shrubs, different herbs. And then there's the timber, the wood for building with, and then there's clay for doing cob. We got good clay. And then there's all these beautiful rocks, which I briefly thought of as a liability, but very quickly realized that that was a tremendous asset. And so there's all this plant diversity. So that's all I need, really. That's everything I really need to work with is here. We make compost. We buy actually in some bone meal because there's a little bit of shortage of phosphorus. Other than that, my main fertilizer is compost and leaf mold, which I use my urine on as a nitrogen source. And
Have you routed your outhouse or bathroom to the compost for that?
the urine, yes.
I love
'Cause
that.
that's pretty safe. That goes on the leaves in the winter and on the compost in the summer. And the humanure, we dug trenches for many years. Like all those terraces out towards the road, every one of those started off as a trench that the outhouse buckets went into. There's a lot of lineal feet of outhouse trenches, which also makes you do the double digging, which makes the soil that much better. So killing a lot of birds with one stone there, we're getting rid of them, we're putting in fertilizer, we're doing deep digging. But lately we've finally shifted to just a humanure kind of compost situation.
Compost toilet or?
Well, the toilet is just a bucket.
Yeah.
And then we dump it in, cover it over with sawdust. And then once it's full, we'll start a new one and wait for that one to break down.
Cool. I think one of the greatest losses of our time is not here, but like in general society, is the loss of nutrients through our excrement and through the food we throw away. And, can you tell us a little bit about how you're more in a closed system, or, what's different about how you live? I mean, you've kind of touched on a little bit here, but do you have more to say?
Well, yeah, I really don't like to let any organic matter leave the property. And in fact, my fertility, a lot of it comes down the mountain. So I live at the foot of the mountain, and in the spring floods bring down these huge wads of leaves on their way to the ocean, but they don't get past here.
Do not go.
I pull that out and put it into piles. Leaf mold is like, to grow all these woodland things, that's all you need is rotten leaves, leaf mold. It's a treasure, really. Instead of using like all these mixes that you buy, soil mixes, that's all peat moss. Well, that's a mined product. I mean, that's renewable, over the course of 1,000 years, maybe.
Right, very slowly.
So, trying to get away from that. And we make a lot of compost, And like I said, I do the urine. So in the winter, when there's not anything to dump the urine on, I dump it on my wood ashes. And I feel like, so I'm combining nitrogen with potassium. Mm-hmm. So the 3 essential nutrients, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, I've got two out of three I'm producing right here. And so I do buy in some phosphorus, bone meal, and rock phosphate, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, right, and the human manure and just whatever, cardboard. I like to use cardboard.
It breaks down nice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't imagine you get too many Amazon deliveries here, though. So.
Well, not too many,
Not too
but I
many.
am buying a lot of books. But I go to great lengths to not buy them from Amazon.
I can imagine.
I use their website. It's a very helpful website. But then I go on eBay, go like Book Finder, like anything to avoid shopping with Amazon.
Take that, Bezos.
Takes a lot of time.
That's great. I want to ask you about beauty, because this is something I've heard you talk about and read in your writing of how important, beyond just utilitarianism of, we, grow this crop, eat this food. Beauty is something that greatly informs your process. Can you just tell us what beauty means to you and how it flows through your life? What does it look like? How do you perceive it, attune to it?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I have to think about how to put that in words. I mean, for one thing, I think beauty is one thing that really unites us with Gaia. Like, I think I think we have the same idea of beauty. Like, Gaia is working towards something that we see as beautiful. Like, our perception of beauty is the same as what the planet is trying to do. And I can think of a couple of examples. There's a beautiful little creek right out here, just, a less than 5-minute walk. Little mountain stream, little pools and waterfalls and big trees hanging over. And it was like my absolute favorite thing to do was go rock hopping up the creek. Like, and every 50 feet, it's a new picture postcard. You never know what's going to be next. You go, whoa, here's this beautiful little waterfall dropping into this pool and this tree hanging over. And then we had a hurricane in 1978 came up here, and there was a landslide from the top of the mountain down, and it erased my beautiful creek overnight. The next morning, it was just like a 50-foot swath of nothing but rubbly rocks. No plants. On each side, like huge mounds of dead trees that took them years to rot down, lining the creek on both sides. It was gone. But now it's getting beautiful again. It's like composing itself. The landscape is composing itself in the same beauty. It'll never be as beautiful as it was because some of those trees were, 75, 80 years old. It's going to take a long time for it to get back to that again, but it's getting there. It's approaching. I wish digital cameras had been invented sooner. I would have this great documentation of everything that's happened out there. I never really had a camera, except rarely. So that's one example. Another example I've thought of is about the plants. So we look at ferns, right? And they just have these beautiful leaves. They don't make flowers. People grow them because the leaves are so beautiful. And, big craze in Victorian times of collecting ferns and everything and growing ferneries and so on. Well, then the plants evolve a little more and they learn how to make flowers, right? And then it's like the emphasis on beauty goes into the flowers. Some of the flowering plants have very nice leaves, undoubtedly, but that's not really the main thing why we grow them. We grow them for the flowers. So it's like the evolution of beauty has kind of moved on. Nature, when it just had leaves, it made really, really beautiful leaves. And now it's got this option of making flowers. So instead it's focusing on making really, really beautiful flowers. That's one thought that occurs to me. But as far as aesthetics of the design, so I say a botanical garden of useful plants grown ecologically arranged ornamentally. So So I want it to be a beautiful garden, according to my standards. But one of the places I look for information and inspiration in that regard is to Chinese gardens. And I have assembled a huge amount of information about Chinese gardens. I've got a stack of downloads, 18 inches tall, probably, plus every book that I've ever been able to find in English on the subject. So the Chinese had this whole idea. To the Chinese, landscape is mountains and waters, is the word for landscape, is mountains and waters. And they think that mountains and waters represents the Tao, like it really is the Tao. All these hermits, they want to go into the mountains and they just want to sit there and look at the mountains. And they have this whole concept of jing, which is translated as a scene or scenery. And the idea is if you can get it just right, it impacts your heart. Heart, mind, they say. They don't make a distinction between heart and mind. That's one word that means heart, mind. And it's impacted by what we can call beautiful scenery. It's the most important thing in the world. All Chinese poetry is basically landscape poetry, mountains and waters poetry. All the great paintings is mountains and waters paintings. Like it's all about mountains and water, which is yang and yin. Mountains are the ultimate yang and water is the ultimate yin, which is why I had to put a pond in my garden. Even though there's no running water here, I had to have water. I got the rocks. I need the water. So I'm very much informed about that. And there's all kinds of writings about Chinese gardens. Really excellent new book came out, Dumbarton Oak's Anthology of Chinese Garden Literature. I waited for this book for 20 years, and they finally brought it out a couple of years ago. Really good. So that's kind of my where a lot of my thinking about the landscape goes. It's a lot about just moving around, because I'm going to be here. I'm going to be just walking around here for the rest of my life. It's already been 50 years and however much more. And I just want it to be beautiful. So it's like moving through, and it has a lot to do with diversity. Like one of the things that makes an area beautiful is the diversity of it and the moving from shady out into sunny, and the different, just like I said about the creek, like every 50 feet is a new calendar picture, so I want my garden to be like that as well. So yeah, I have a little essay on my blog about aesthetics at Mountain Garden, so I talk about some of that stuff.
I love it. And I was here a couple days ago taking pictures and just wandering around on my own. And it's delightful because you round a corner and you're like, oh, a little, just like some little plant pops out at, in this little spot. And then you see the pathway curve around, and then there's a bench, or then there's the creek trickling through, or just like there's there's not a right angle in the whole place. It's nice curves and flow and just delight. It's an adventure. Even though it's 2.8 acres, you could just meander here. I did meander here for hours, and I could just spend more and more hours meandering and hanging out.
Yeah, that's the idea. Good.
Yeah. Well, it's been effective.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what is a plant that, or if not a plant, maybe some concept that you've been getting really excited about lately? What's really piquing your interest lately? Or in your thoughts?
Lately?
Like, what are you obsessed with? What are you researching? What are you learning about, or even just noticing?
Ooh, I've got so many irons in the fire right now. I'm buying volumes of this book called Science and Civilization in China. It's like it's one of the masterworks of the 20th century, really, this guy cranked out. That what I'm reading about is Chinese medicine and their search for immortality. That's fascinating stuff. And he's got a whole volume on botany and another whole volume on agriculture. So I'm really immersing myself in that. I'm very much interested in indigenous peoples' thinking, like a lot of everything I can find about insights into the mentality of hunter-gatherer peoples, Australian Aborigines or whoever. A lot of it got trashed before we ever got around to recording any of it. So many of the Indians just died off because of disease before the white people even ever got there. And the Amazon was, this huge, elaborate civilization of cities and roads and everything. It's all erased. We're just now starting to discover it with aerial photography, what's really in there. All that's very fascinating to me. As far as plants, I'm still pursuing the Chinese herbs. It's gotten to be a big interest of mine, and especially these adaptogenic plants. So whatever of those that I can grow.
Do you have a favorite one that you're growing?
I do. My favorite plant, my signature herb, so to speak, is one called Gynostemma pentaphyllum. We refer to it as jiaogulan, the Chinese name. And I bill that as the best plant to grow for your health. If you can only grow one plant, you should grow this jiaogulan because it's a...
How do you spell that?
Jiaogulan, jiaogulan.
All right, thanks.
So it's an adaptogen. It's the easiest to grow of all the adaptogens. So these adaptogens are, as they come into, it was a category that didn't exist in Western herbalism. The Chinese got adaptogens. They call them tonics. The Indians got adaptogens. They call them rasayanas, typically translated as rejuvenative. So these herbs are always associated with the idea of longevity, health preservation. So jiaogulan is actually best known as a longevity herb, but it does a lot of different things. It was discovered, it's not really a traditional Chinese herb as far as what's called TCM. It was a folk herb. But the Chinese got good enough at keeping statistics that they realized there's a certain part of China where there's an unusually large number of people living to be 100 years old or older. So they go down there to research, and actually Japanese went down and researched it, and they're all drinking this tea, and they're calling it immortality tea. So this is now a very big thing in Japan and China. It's starting to get to America. Tea shops usually have it. They call it sweet tea vine. It's the easiest to grow of all the adaptogens. So as adaptogens, I started to say, we didn't have that category in Western herbal medicine. It just wasn't there. But now that they're coming, and that's a whole interesting story in itself, the discovery of adaptogens in the West has a lot to do with the Russians wanting to win more gold medals at the Olympics. And so they did all this research on their main adaptogen, which is Siberian ginseng, Eleuthero.
So is that why it's so popular, do you think?
That's part of it, yeah. So before athletes had to start taking all these illegal things, first of all, they give them credit, they tried to do it with plants. And they did do it with plants, but then everybody, because you can't patent plants.
Right.
So they lost their competitive edge. But they're the one, that's when the term adaptogen got invented. And then they had to figure out, well, what do they do? Well, what they do is they boost your immune system, which is a very, very complicated matter. It's very interesting to read about all this stuff. Because that's when the discovery of the immune system happened, is by trying to figure out what these adaptogens are doing in the body. So much of what we know about the human body is by looking at plants. They've taught us everything. And the main receptor in the brain, the nicotinic, tobacco, right? Or the muscarinic, that's from Amanita muscaria. These things are named because of the plants. That's what taught us. So these adaptogens are boosting the immune system, right? Basically, they're doing a lot of normalizing of body functions. For example, they won't make your blood, we got pharmaceuticals that'll make your blood pressure go down if it's too high. And we've got these other ones that'll make it go up if it's too low. But what the adaptogens do is normalize your blood pressure. So consequently, they're very, very safe. You can't overdo on normal. So anyway, yeah, this is my favorite plant, and I think I'm the person who introduced it to North America, actually. I got it from this guy in Japan about 40 years ago or so. Now it's lots of people grow it now. And I bill it as the best plant to grow for your health because it's super easy to grow. In fact, it's not exactly invasive, but almost. It's all over my garden. Fortunately, it doesn't make very many seeds, so it doesn't really spread that way, fortunately or unfortunately.
Is it more by root cuttings?
Yeah, it spreads by the roots. And then if it runs over the ground, it roots down. Mm-hmm. And then it's super easy to use. You don't even have to dig it up. You use the above ground part. You just clip it off. We harvest it several times a year and dry it. You could grow yourself a year's supply if you lived on the 8th floor of an apartment. As long as you had a balcony, you put a planter out there, you could grow yourself a year's worth of juggernaut. So between those two things, easy to grow, easy to use, and super effective. It's got identical compounds to ginseng. The only other plant in the plant kingdom that has ginsenosides besides ginseng is actually in the squash family, so it's totally unrelated to ginseng, but it's got ginsenosides.
Does it taste better than ginseng?
Tastes similar.
Okay.
Bittersweet.
Pretty bitter.
We grow two kinds. One we call bitter and the other we call sweet, which is also bitter, but it's also sweet. Actually, it has some kind of a super sweet ingredient in it, similar to stevia.
Oh, okay.
So that was researching that for a while, but then they've got on to like its health benefits, and then they kind of shelved the sugar substitute angle. But apparently they have quite sweet varieties selected in Japan. We have one we call sweet that is very nice for tea, makes a very nice cup of tea. I think they might have even sweeter ones in Japan that I haven't gotten a hold of. So that's my favorite plant.
Awesome. I mean, here you go, folks. You just got a free longevity tip for the rest of your life. You heard it here.
Yep.
Thanks, Joe.
I encourage everybody. Yeah, anybody who gardens should stick out. I divide metasoriums into 3 categories. There's the ones that are for problems that everybody has, like a common cold, a bee sting, a cut or a wound. Like everybody should have plants to take care of those problems. And then there's the plants that are for specific aspects of the body, like your respiratory system, your digestive system, circulatory system, whatever. If you have problems with that, like every winter you catch a cold and then it turns into a cough and it lingers around all the way till next spring, then you should study up on respiratory system herbs that are good for coughs, and get some of those going in your garden, and harvest them. And then the third category, but if you never have respiratory problems, you don't really need to grow those unless you're somebody like me that wants to grow everything. But then the third category is the adaptogens. And there again, everybody should grow some adaptogens because everybody wants to be healthier.
Right. And instead of just trying to fix an acute situation, they help you just be overall healthier.
Yeah, it's preventive medicine.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
The best kind.
I mean, thank you, plants.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So do you still grow wasabi?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I remember way back. So we used to live, right now we live in California, but we used to live in Durham. And so I remember finding out that you were growing wasabi, and like actually Lantern Restaurant, Andrea Rusing would buy it and use it there, right? And some other restaurants. I thought that was so
Andrea?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. She played a major part in me connecting into even knowing what slow food was or anything. It really major impact. If you're ever listening, Andrea, thank you. But
I'll tell you a funny story about Andrea. So I got this request through Carolina Farm Stewardship, whatever, to get some, I guess it was ramps to this restaurant because they were hosting the guy who originated the slow food thing came to Durham at one point in time, and Andrea wanted to put on a nice thing for him. And so, like, there's this hurry up thing. Can you get a bunch of ramps
Hurry
together?
up and get some ramps.
Yeah. So I said, okay. And actually, I'm going down to Chapel Hill. I can take them. And so they gave me the address. Well, it's the house that I lived in.
What?
Yeah. She and her husband, whose name I'm blanking at the moment, the record producer guy.
The rock
They're
star.
both great. They're both really good friends. They ended up buying the house that my parents actually built in Chapel Hill.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Synchronicities happen all the time, don't
That's
they?
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful house too.
Yeah. They did a really nice addition onto it.
Cool. So you're growing wasabi and are you still, I think at the time when I found it, you were like the only person who had figured out how to actually grow actual wasabi in the eastern United States. What's the situation with wasabi now?
Well, it's probably about the same. It'll only grow in the mountains. It's a mountain plant. It likes to grow next to little mountain streams, just like what I have here. And yeah, it took me quite a while to figure out how to grow it. And that's one of my things that I advocate for when I talk about not earning money. Like if I had a job 9 to 5, I never would have had the time to put into this. Like it took me some years of diddling around with the wasabi to get it figured out because I had a lot of time on my hands, to do something like that. I probably never would have gotten that together if I was just gardening, in the evening when I got home from work or something. So yeah, I figured out how to grow that, and there's a number of issues around wasabi. The kind of wasabi that's sold in restaurants has these great big roots. Actually, I think it's the kind of crown of that. Anyway, those are rare genetic mutations, you could even call it.
Okay. Kind of like
and
horseradish.
They have to be
looking,
propagated.
right? They kind of look like horseradish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They have to be propagated by tissue culture. You have to clone them. So what I grow is just seed-grown wasabi. And the roots are also nice, but they're just very fibrous. They're just like the roots of any other plant. They don't make this big chunky thing. To grow that, you have to buy clones from somebody who's doing tissue culture. There's somebody out in British Columbia. It's a bigger deal out in the Pacific Northwest.
Probably better environment for it there.
Possibly, yeah. Although this is pretty good.
Seems pretty good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my main source of income is selling seeds, which nobody else seems to be doing because they're all busy raising these clone kind of ones that don't make much seed. And then the product is the leaves.
Oh.
And the leaves are quite wonderful. I've sold them to Andrea in the past and hopefully will again. It's not a major thing with me anymore. It's kind of like a little bit of a sideline, but I make $1,000 a year off of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it adds to the whole picture. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I enjoy working with the wasabi. And the leaves are really quite nice to eat. Everybody thinks that real wasabi is going to, like if the fake wasabi, which is horseradish with green food coloring, is that strong, like the real thing must probably going to really blow your head off, right? But that's not it. It's just a much more interesting and complex flavor with a lot of sweetness. It's just not like horseradish is just kind of, they're nice anyway. And they get quite big, the leaves. You could actually make sushi out of them, probably.
Cool. Little rolls.
Yeah. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun to work with. And there's other plants come along, I have different specialties. Part of what I try to do is come up with new crops for my area, for my bioregion. So that's a great one for Western North Carolina, wasabi. Because like I said, there's only a relatively small percentage of the U.S. where you can grow it at all. So like specialize in these mountain crops. Another one would be dongui, the Chinese angelica, the big women's herb in Chinese medicine. That's a mountain plant. You can't grow that below 2,000 feet. In fact, probably even below 3,000 feet, it's problematic. So there's another like mountain crop.
Cool. Cool. So fun to just steward these little species, these just niche plants that are, I don't know, they offer so much, but they're so special and require such a specific habitat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I got a couple more questions. I'm curious, what does a day in your life look like? And I imagine that there's no single day in your life, but just, I think this is so different from how most people live their life. So I'd love to hear, like, from when you wake up to when you go to bed, just kind of what's your flow?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I like to point out in terms of advocating for the kind of lifestyle I'm advocating versus the kind of lifestyle most people have is I get up in the morning and well, for one thing, I can wake up whenever I want. It turns out always to be about 7 o'clock. And the whole day's in front of me to do whatever I want. I don't have to get in the car. I don't have to be at work at 9 o'clock. I mean, that's worth a lot. that's huge. People don't really know it because they're just, you go through life. Yeah, you have to be at school at 9 o'clock, and yeah, you have to be here at 9 o'clock, and then you get a job, and you got to be there at 9 o'clock, and then you get 2 weeks vacation. But to have your life be such that, every morning get up and just like, wow, what am I going to do today? There's out of these 20 or 30 different things that I really want to do. So basically it's just like go out into the garden and start doing stuff. I might go out there with the objective of I'm going to do such and such, but it might be a long time before I get to such and such because on the way I have to do this first before I can do that, and then that leads me to da-da, and it's just like you get led from one thing to the next. They call that, by the very dismissive term of puttering in the garden. That's like how civilization tries to demean our proper niche. What we should be really doing in life is puttering in the garden, and then you're getting hell. So it's about integration of needs. Our needs are all chopped up by money. You can say, get this money, and then you go here to the grocery store, that's one need, and then you go here for entertainment, that's another need, and then you go here for exercise, and that's another. It's all chopped up where you go out in the garden and you got it all. You're getting exercise, you're getting inspiration, you're being creative, you're collecting food or medicine. Like, it's all the same thing, right? So that's my day. Just go out there and putter. And if the weather's not suitable for that, I stay home and read. I got a big library. That's my method of getting information in. Other people do other ways of acquiring information. For me, it's books.
Love it. Sounds lovely. And here we are in the library. So do you have more books in your house as well?
Oh, yeah.
Just books.
Books. Yeah, about a third of the library is in my house.
Okay.
I actually had this woman out for a library consult the other day. So I really want to. It's a great library for somebody who has a lot of time and likes to. The kind of people who like to go to used bookstores would love it in here. But there's a lot. But like I say, there's so much more at my house, and including like a lot of the best stuff at my house. So I'm going to try and revamp the whole thing. Like there's a lot of this stuff that's just kind of going to go into deep storage. Like at one point I was collecting all this agricultural literature from like the 19th century when everything was organic. Like, oh, this is really cool how they grew asparagus or how they did fruit, all these techniques. But really, nobody's pulling those off the shelf very much.
Those are pretty niche.
Yeah, yeah. So it's going to be a matter of shifting a lot of that stuff into deep storage and trying to get a lot of the more immediate stuff out here now. And I am buying a lot of books these days. Like I said, I've got a little extra income coming in, and I'm buying a lot of plants and I'm buying a lot of books. I'm buying books even that I know I will never read, but I think should be in the library.
It's a legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And tell us about this library, because it's not just a book library. You offer medicine as well. What's the invitation to the broader public or to the community?
Come. That's the invitation. I mean, we're open to the public. People are welcome to come. I call it a self-help health center. So all these books over here are on herb, or how to grow them, how to identify them, how to use them, what they're good for. There's one whole big section on Chinese herbs specifically, and then there's, Ayurvedic, American Indian, different cultures, herbs, and so on. And then there's the herbs. So there's a whole wall back there of Chinese herbs. And then there's a whole wall over here of tinctures of single herbs that people can mix together. It's a self-help health center. So it's self-service. It's open 24/7. People come up here and, get what they need. I have a lot of the more popular tinctures for sale in a little shop down by the driveway, but I'm not at all comfortable with diagnosing or prescribing or giving any kind of health advice. What I provide, if people need it, is bibliographic assistance. Like, here, read this book. I'm not going to tell you what to take, unless you happen to have a health problem that I have had, and I'll tell you what I did to cure it. But that's as far as I'll go in that direction. But yeah, so it's a resource for the community. All this stuff, all my tinctures, they're not made according to good manufacturing practices. I could never get product insurance. I don't even try to put them in stores. I do that for partly for the education of the apprentices and for the community and other people. I have certain following. I don't mail tinctures anymore out, but people come here to get them, especially a lot of these Chinese formulas. A lot of martial artists are kind of involved, and Taoist practitioners. There's a lot of involvement with the Chinese herbs from those quarters, and I'm one of the few people that's producing those kind of formulas. So that's some of what we do in the herb shop.
Cool. And I like it, a self-help health center where they come read the book, then make the tincture or the formulation of herbs, and then they can go home and treat themselves.
That's what I always did earlier on. If I had some kind of health problem, I'd go to the health food store, I'd go to the book section. Then I'd read up, and then I'd go over here and buy some herbs. Well, I've got better books and better herbs.
You leveled up. Upgrade.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm hearing too, it doesn't sound like you actually have a formal herbal education. It's more just self-taught through the years, through the books, through your own health, through living with the plants. Is that so?
Yeah, but also I then got hired by a school in Asheville called Taoist Traditions. It's a really, really interesting school. It's a 4-year program to become a Chinese practitioner, and it's very much involved with this 88th generation or something Taoist priest. He's kind of the inspiration for the school, and he actually teaches he does like a 4-day weekend a couple times per semester. Nowadays, most of it's online. So I picked up a lot. I was at the school. I just finally resigned my position a few years ago.
So we just had a phone call come in, a scam call.
Yeah.
So we picked back up. You were at this
talking about Taoist traditions.
Yeah, Taoist traditions.
So I've considered myself a Taoist ever since high school. And Taoism is really the philosophy of how to live on Earth. Like, there's a book on Taoism, China's green religion. There's a lot of people talking about the fact that Taoism, if we want a philosophy, we don't have to invent a philosophy of how to live on Earth in a way that doesn't mess it up, that it's good for us. That is one of my principles of another approach to defining a paradise garden is you take what's best for the planet, what's best for society, meaning equal distribution of resources, which is what underlies warfare and crime and everything, is to the extent you can get to that. And then what's best for the individuals. That's like a tripod, right? if you can find something that works for all three of those, you can drop a plumb bob in the middle, and that's your paradise garden, right? So that's what Taoism is. It's the philosophy of how to live on Earth without messing it up. Anyway, so here's a school, Taoist tradition. I mean, it's just everything is always fate, It always, nothing happens by accident. And then I got invited to teach botany there, medical botany, and put in a garden at the school. I did that. So I worked there from the time the school was founded, really. I forget when that was. I think I was there for about 15 years. I also taught herbal preparations, and so I learned a whole lot about how the Chinese make all these different things from herbs, pills and lotions and liniments and wines and all that stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed teaching there. I really enjoyed the school, but I just driving into Asheville, I did not enjoy, and just needed to focus more on here. So that's what I finally stopped teaching. But they still send students out. I give tours, to the students and so on. So I'm still somewhat involved with the school. But I'm self-taught, but I also learned a lot from being at the school and sitting in on classes and so on.
I can't help but laugh at the irony of how botany was last on your list in college and you ended up teaching it.
Yeah.
It's pretty great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to be open to where life wants to take you,
That's how do you do that?
Well, you don't have a job. That's how. Otherwise, you've locked yourself in, by the time people get to be your age. I mean, maybe you're lucky enough not to got a mortgage and you're paying off the car loan and you're locked in. Don't go there.
Try not to get locked in.
Yeah.
If that's not what you want.
Yeah, really.
Like, make that choice. Yep. So were you born into a family that had this kind of money mindset that you have, or where did that come from?
Okay, no, I was not born into a family that had a particular aversion to money. My dad was a college professor, quite successful. He was chairman of the English department down at UNC. I think they get paid really well. And so it was just a regular middle-class upbringing. But, that 60s was a time when people were thinking a lot about problems, the Vietnam War and like what's war all about, and like everybody's out protesting. I never did a lot of protesting. I said, well, what war's all about is this lifestyle that we are enjoying, that's just elitist, really, and how to get out of that. So, and then going off in the Peace Corps and seeing these tribal people and all that really heightened that. But so I see this big dichotomy between living as part of nature, Gaia, being, which we are. I mean, we are, like all life on Earth is one thing. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's really obvious. It all started from one. So when did it stop all being one, Just like you and me started from being one, but we don't think of our knees and our blood and our lung as separate things. It's just all one, right? So that's what we need, is to be part of that. I think that's the whole problem. Like from global warming down to like the opiate crisis, it all has to do with the fact that we no longer occupy a legitimate niche, which really fulfills our needs as well as, any creature's niche is like eat a bear or a possum or a snail or whatever. It does what it's programmed to do, and it's rewarded by getting back what it needs, and it fulfills a useful function. And humans are supposed to do that too. We're born, we're programmed. We don't come into this world empty. We come into this world just like any other creature with a program to tell us what to do and what's our function, and then we're going to be rewarded by having our needs filled. And then we're born, and it's not like it was supposed to be. We were supposed to be these hunter-gatherers walking all the time. We got these huge legs, And instead, I think that's what a lot of autism is about, is just babies who the gap is so great between what we're born expecting and what we get that they just can't handle it. And none of us can really handle it. Freud wrote a book called Civilization and Its Discontents. He thought it was like a fundamental problem, but he thought we were just stuck. We just have to deal with it. So we'll all go to a psychoanalyst. But I think we can find a way out back to a legitimate niche, which I think is gardening, or like I said, puttering, that will actually fulfill, be good for the planet and good for us. And also, the whole issue of the unequal distribution of resources, which underlies all crime and injustice and warfare and everything else. So it's just thinking about all that and the way money fits into it. I'll tell you another thought about money is like animals eat food and we turn it into blood, and the blood circulates all around our body and enables us to do work and enables us to grow. Capital eats the planet and it turns it into money. Oh, and incidentally, we excrete out what we don't need, and that's fertilizer, and that's good for the planet. Capitalism eats the earth, whatever it is, the fish at the bottom of the ocean, the trees, the rocks, like anything. It gobbles it up and turns it into money. The money circulates around and enables civilization, the economy to grow and do stuff. And it leaves behind garbage, slag heaps. Nothing good at all. So that's money. Money is the blood of civilization. I just don't want to, from a certain perspective, it really doesn't matter whether you're working for Greenpeace or for big oil, and it really doesn't matter whether you're buying organic groceries or junk food. It's money. You're part of the money system. I just don't want to be part of the money system.
It's amazing. How much money do you think you've earned over your lifetime?
I don't know. For a lot of years, that was under $10,000 a year. I think it's crept up above that because I do these workshops now, and it's pretty lucrative. Not as lucrative as it could be. I teach a workshop for 5 people, and then I'll make $250. But I could teach it to 15 people, and then I'd make whatever more. So there's more that could be made, but. And then money from I sell plants. Since COVID, not so much. I used to go to this Asheville Herb Festival, and I used to go to Medicine for the Earth and sell my plants. We sell some seeds, but actually that's all Jeff's business. He does the seeds and he keeps the money. And that's kind of my vision for this little small community is there's going to be everybody's going to work together on supporting the garden, but everybody's going to have their own little source of income. Of course, how much income do you need if you're provided with a house and with food and all your utilities? Not too much, hopefully. So for a long time, it was less than $10,000 a year. I think it's gotten to be a little bit more than that because of, like I said, being more successful. And I turn it into plants and books because my fixed expenses are. Well, I keep my car on the road, although, ideally you could have a community of 6 people and they'd all share one car. And that costs some money. And then it costs me $100 a month approximately for the phone and the internet and the website and all that stuff. And then my taxes is a couple $1,000s a year. And that's it. That's my fixed expenses. Everything over that is discretionary income. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I love this. I love this just example and this invitation to others that look, you're here almost 80, living a beautiful life that you're happy with, and you did it on your terms. And, there's certain elements at play that you were able to access at a certain time, and it worked for you. And this is, no one's going to be able to replicate exactly your life because it's not, they're not you. But this is an invitation, or they can glean from this a possibility and maybe see what that possibility looks like in their own life to some degree. And I think something you said earlier when we were in between, when we were switching batteries, actually, you said something earlier about, this is an example that maybe people coming, they just take a piece of what, they learn a piece here and they can take that home into their own life. And I really love that. It's really unique and special, and I'm really grateful for you inviting us, or not even inviting us, but inviting, in general, the general us of like the world to come experience this space and what you've created and that you offer so much here. Done it without this major mindset that we have to give our whole lives just to making money. You've done it. You've shown it, and I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think it's an example that needs to be out there. Kids are born and raised, and they just never have any idea that there's another way to live on Earth. I mean, we've lived without money for how many million years? All the way up until even 100 years ago, there was people in these mountains that were 90% self-reliant. They could go to town once a year maybe and take some corn liquor and buy a few metal tools and some coffee. Or something like that. But people just don't know that this is even a possibility. So I thank you for helping me get the word out.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So I'd like to know, you've mentioned a few things, that there's apprentices come to the land. You sell some popular tinctures in the tincture shed down there, and you do workshops and plant walks and things. What else can people do? What else do you offer to people, and where can they find you or more information?
Well, for more information, you can look at my website, which is Mountain Gardens with a S, herbs with a S.com. There's a lot of stuff on there. There's a blog. There's a bunch. I'm trying to finish writing a book. It's going to be called Make Paradise Not Money. And it's basically all stuff that's already on the website. All I have to do is write the introductory chapter, which I gotta get myself pumped up for it, frankly, because I really want to stick it to people that come on, we can't keep living the way we're living, damn it. Anyway, but. So there's a lot of information there on the website. And then there's this 100+ YouTube videos, which you can access either from Mountain Gardens or from Joe Hollis, I think. And you can come here and visit, and we take apprentices. We also take short-term people like woofers, or workaway is another one. People that are traveling around and just want to come for a week or so. We're open to that. We're open to whatever until we're full. There's sort of a carrying capacity here. If it gets up above about 8 people, it starts to feel overloaded, the outdoor kitchen and so on. So we practice neo-primitive living. We shit in a bucket and bury it, and we cook on wood, and we got gravity water that comes down the mountain, and so chop wood, carry water, that whole thing. So you learn that while you're here. And yeah, so that's what I have to offer.
Cool. And of course, as always, those links are in the show notes, so you can access that. And is there anything else that we haven't talked about or covered? I mean, I'm sure there's so much we could probably talk for hours, but is there anything else that a message or something that we haven't covered?
I think you've done really well. I think we covered a lot of ground, and very large proportion of everything I'd like to say. You can also if you look me up online, there was a whole permaculture class. There was a professor down at NC State. He would bring his classes up here, landscape design and permaculture, for years and years and years, like 30 years. And he filmed his whole permaculture course one year, which 2 of the sessions were filmed here. And one of them is just me talking about the history of mountain gardens and my philosophy and so on. The other is a plant walk. There's lots of plant walks on my YouTube. So you could hunt that up as well. Sure, you could find that online.
Cool. I think that's free even, isn't it?
No.
I'm not. Yeah, it is. Okay. I think I've seen parts of that. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for that. We'll try to hunt up that link and put it in the show notes as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Do you remember how much you paid for this land?
I can tell you exactly how much I paid. $720.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, at that point in time, this was the second poorest county in the state. Nobody was moving in. Everybody was moving out. There was for sale signs everywhere. There was all these empty houses you could have. You say, hey, mind if I live in there? I'll mow the lawn. Yeah, sure, go ahead. It's changed dramatically. Now it's a second home kind of demonstrated. Now they're clearing off every ridge top and marking lots, and when they want to sell the land online, they don't show you a picture of the land. They show you a picture of the view. Mm-hmm. It's all about the view. It's really sick. Top of a ridge is the last place where any sane person would want to live, really. And in Borneo, they had this idea that that's where the spirits live. You don't clear the top of the ridge, which was like ecologically very sound, because then you're going to get all kinds of erosion if you clear the top of the ridge. But that's what everybody wants, is their view. That's like the thing nowadays. Anyway, why did I go off on that angle?
Oh, I don't know. I asked you how much you paid for the land.
How much I paid for the land.
Yeah.
So even then, it was still a really good deal. So this guy, Arthur Morgan, a really interesting man, he founded Antioch College. He was the first head of the TVA. He was a really brilliant person. And his son moved on to Silo. So he set up Silo Community, the oldest intentional community in the United States, they call themselves. And he started buying land up here. And then he got offered this big tract down by the river. So that's where he set up the community, and he just kind of kept this land in his family. And they gradually sold off bits and bits until there was just this one little 2.8 acres left, which I purchased from his son, Ernest Morgan. There's a little high school down there, a middle school called the Arthur Morgan School. It's based on his educational principles. The students do a lot of garden work, and there's lots of field trips, and they do lots of wilderness stuff. Very hands-on, kind of like a middle school Montessori in a way. Very cool school. Mostly boarding, but also some neighborhood kids. So I think he gave me a really good deal.
That's amazing.
But it's still, like land prices then were very different from what they are now. I'm sure there are still places where there's cheap land. I mean, the countryside is getting abandoned all over. But what you want is not just cheap land. I mean, I would have been satisfied with any piece of land, but you want community. You don't want to get yourself a piece of cheap land and then the nearest person you can relate to is a 2-hour drive away. And then if you have kids, like where the hell are you going to find playmates? So don't get yourself, so you got to find, location is important. I'm really blessed here because we've got this, alternative community down here, and then we got all this national forest up here. It's really pretty wonderful. But there's probably parts of West Virginia that might be like that too, where they haven't gotten to with mountaintop removal yet. Probably pretty damn cheap land up there.
Yeah. If you can find your people.
Like a cluster of alternative people.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where are you at, people? Raise your hands. Yeah, I feel that. I feel like that's something that I'm researching heavily. I'm like, where are my people? But where's also the land and the climate that speaks to me, and that we can afford to live. It's a big question. I think a lot of people are. It's on their mind.
It's a big life-changing decision to find the piece of land.
Yeah.
Like I say, I was very fortunate to. It just dropped into my lap.
Yeah. And it sounds like throughout your life, too, you've got this sort of trust or faith in something that just guides you. Is that it's what I'm picking up. Is that something? How would you describe that?
I believe that. No, I totally believe that the universe responds to our sincerity.
I love that. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on the show and for letting us come here and interview you and all that you do. Well,
thank you. I've enjoyed it a lot. And it's nice to, outreach is what it's all about. If I was just doing this in a vacuum, I could maybe do a better job. The amount of energy that goes into outreach, of course, is energy subtracted from doing what I do, but outreach is the most important part, really.
It brings energy in a different way.
Thank you for your assistance in outreach.
It's my pleasure. It's a real honor, and it's everything and more that I hope for.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it a lot.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.